November. So will my honourable friend give us an update on negotiations and agree that we should conclude the deal by the 1st of November?
Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I thank him for that question. I thank him for his continual interest in us getting a high-quality trade deal with India, which he has long been a passionate advocate for. Of course, the most important thing is what is in the deal rather than the date that it be delivered. So we remain in round 14 and we recently welcomed Government of India negotiators to London. The prize remains very large, Mr. Speaker, with, for example, with tariffs as high as 150% for whisky, 125% for autos, and making sure that we get our key service sectors being able to export into a market of 1.4 billion people.
Chair of the Select Committee, Liam Byrne.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Secretary of State will have seen the recommendations that our committee set out this morning for ending the circus of the Post Office administration of the redress schemes for victims of the Horizon scandal. Now, I know, Mr. Speaker, that she takes this incredibly seriously, and so I know that she will study our cross-party recommendations for the new legislation that she is about to bring before the House. But, Mr. Speaker, the question for today is this. If we put all of the ongoing investigations on one side, on the basis of the facts as they are known today, does she still have full confidence in Nick Reed as the Chief Executive of the Post Office in running the redress schemes currently underway?
Minister.
Okay, thank you for his work, and I've taken a quick look at the report this morning, although it was only issued this morning, and all the recommendations he makes in that report we either fixed or are fixing with the assistance of the Horizon Compensation Advisory Board. We believe, absolutely, we agree with him that we need to bring the schemes, in terms of the compensation schemes, in-house. The GLO scheme has already been delivered by the Department of Business and Trade. We believe the further compensation that will flow from our overturn of convictions, we will be overturning hundreds of convictions through legislation in this House very shortly, as quickly as possible. That will provide a flow of hundreds of millions of pounds of compensation to those individuals. That will be done by the Department of Business and Trade.
Martin Vickers.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As the trade envoy to the Western Balkans, the issue of government-to-government agreements is frequently raised with me, and there's no doubt that if they were available, more deals could be done with the Balkan countries. Could the Minister give an update on the government's position, please?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I thank my honourable friend, particularly for the brilliant work he does as trade envoy. He covers more markets than any of our other trade envoys with greater skill and dexterity. Mr. Speaker, I and this department were pioneers back in 2017 in putting in place a G2G agreement with Peru for the UK to be the delivery partner for the 2019 Pan American Games. A great deal of business with and in Peru has resulted since. We remain open to future G2G agreements on a case-by-case basis, and I'm happy to meet with him to discuss what specific things he has in mind would work in the Western Balkans.
Stephen Kinnock.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I've repeatedly asked ministers whether any strings were attached to the £500 million of taxpayers' money that was given to Tata Steel, particularly with regard to job guarantees. I haven't had a straight answer, so I'll try again today. Can the Secretary of State please confirm whether any conditionality was attached to the £500 million, or did the government simply buy the bluff from Tata Steel about closure and give £500 million so that we could make 2,800 people redundant?
Minister.
Mr. Speaker, the honourable friend knows, because he attends the Transition Board meetings, that his question is not really relevant. What he's trying to get to the bottom of is the fact that we have provided £500 million to ensure that steelmaking continues in Port Talbot. Tata made it very clear that it was uneconomic and also unsustainable to continue with steelmaking. So the support that we have given will ensure that thousands, north of 5,000 jobs will continue in Port Talbot and also support the supply chains as well. On top of this, there's £100 million provided at the Transition Board, where members like himself, the unions and all the local representatives can ensure the support that is needed locally to the people that will need to go through to a transition will get the support that they need. That's £100 million on top of the £500 million, Mr. Speaker. Without that support, there would not have been any steelmaking in the future at Port Talbot.
Bernie Shum.
Mr. Speaker, will the Secretary of State wake up to the huge potential that universities have to tackle all the problems that we have in society, including climate change, which comes to Huddersfield, which is one of the best universities in the country for working with local businesses to make the future safe for our country.
I thank the honourable gentleman for his question. If he sends a proposal to my office about what we could do on a visit to the University of Huddersfield, I'd be very, very keen to take a look. We do support our universities, and if it has a specific business and trade angle in particular, we will see what we can do if diaries allow.
Richard Ford.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Hussain from East Devon, who I represent, has effectively been robbed of £100,000, given that £40,000 of substandard building work is having to be levelled and destroyed. The Federation of Master Builders has campaigned for a compulsory licence scheme for construction companies. The Domestic Building Works Consumer Protection Bill would outlaw cowboy builders, provide compensation for consumers, and would ensure reputable builders are not undercut by unlicensed rogues. Can the Minister please take a fresh look at this proposed bill?
Minister Richard.
Well, can I thank you for his question? Here is a very important point. It's one of the most frequent correspondences I get from colleagues across this House in terms of road builders. We're determined to try and make sure that this doesn't happen to our constituents. We advise them to use builders that are registered with Trustmark, which is a trusted mark in terms of making sure that work is done properly. Very happy to meet him to discuss his potential legislation.
Kirsten Osmond.
Goldman Sachs found that Brexit Britain has significantly underperformed compared to other advanced economies, resulting in GDP in the UK being 5% lower than it would have been if we had not left the EU. Does the Secretary of State appreciate that the best way in reality to grow the economy, boost business confidence and reduce trade barriers is by rejoining the European Union?
I would recommend to the Honourable Lady that she reads the report which my department produced the 31st of January about the benefits of Brexit, and that explains exactly what is happening with the UK economy. Claiming that the figures for GDP would have increased by 5% when we're outperforming our G7 partners is simply not credible. And the fact that she wants to take us back to square one is exactly the reason why people need to stick with the plan that Conservatives have.
Final question, Jim Shannon.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm very encouraged by the Secretary of State's comments about the free trade deal with Israel. UK is a friend of Israel. Israel is a friend of the UK. So what can we do more to increase trade together? And more importantly, if I can say this very regionally, how can the Secretary of State ensure that Northern Ireland can be very much part of that trade deal, so that our companies in Strangford and across Northern Ireland can also feel the benefit? Thank you.
The Honourable Gentleman will remember we had the Northern Ireland Investment Summit where we talked about bringing more investment into Northern Ireland. He will know around 500 Israeli firms operate in the United Kingdom. That investment from overseas is creating thousands of jobs in high-value sectors, and an FTA will help to increase the investment that we see, and that will benefit businesses in Northern Ireland too.
That completes the questions. We'll let the front benches change over. Right, we now come to business questions. I call the Shanley of the House, Lucy Powell.
If the Leader will give us the forthcoming business.
Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The business for the week commencing the 11th of March will include, on Monday the 11th of March, continuation of the budget debate. On Tuesday the 12th of March, conclusion of the budget debate. On Wednesday the 13th of March, consideration of an allocation of time motion, followed by all stages of the National Insurance Contribution Reduction in Rates No. 2 bill. Thursday the 14th of March, Estimates Day. There will be debates on estimates relating to the Department for Education insofar as it relates to special educational needs and disabilities provision, and the Home Office insofar as it relates to asylum and migration. At 5 p.m, the House will be asked to agree all outstanding estimates. Friday the 15th of March, private members' bills. The provisional business for the week commencing the 18th of March includes proceedings on the Supply and Appropriation Anticipation and Adjustments Bill, followed by consideration of Lord's amendments to the Safety of Rwanda Asylum and Immigration Bill. Tuesday, the 19th of March, remaining stages of the Trade Comprehensive and Progressive Agreement for Trans-Pacific Partnership Bill, Lords. Further business will be announced in the usual way.
Lucy Pop.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. This week, the Science Secretary made a grovelling apology and retracted baseless allegations she made against a member of her own advisory body on her own personal Twitter account based on a dodgy dossier produced by a Conservative think tank. Remarkably, the damages paid out came from taxpayers' money from her department. This is a new low for ministerial standards. So perhaps the leader can clarify a few things. Was the £15,000 paid in damages the total costs borne by the Science Department? Apparently, she was given appropriate advice, but did she follow that advice, or were her accusations against the advice she received? Because if so, then surely she should personally pay the costs. Will the leader urgently ensure the Secretary of State is accountable to Parliament? They can't have it both ways. If the money was paid by taxpayers because it related to her ministerial responsibilities, then she must come to Parliament as a minister and account for that. Other ministers were told their own Twitter accounts were a matter for them personally. Does the Science Secretary still have the confidence of the leader? Mr Speaker, all we got from yesterday's budget was old news, briefed and leaked to the papers before it was given to Parliament. The next time the leader cries crocodile tears for the rights of this place, she could reflect on their failure to stand by parliamentary convention and deliver budgets here first. Although I'm sure the leader was relieved that her marginal constituency didn't get a name check because her colleagues were all complaining this was the kiss of death. But on the substance, the verdict is now in. The OBR forecasts tax receipts as a proportion of GDP are set to rise to their highest level since the Second World War. The Resolution Foundation says the big picture has not changed. Taxes are heading up, and this will be the first Parliament in modern history in which living standards fall lower than at the end than they were at the start. The Institute for Fiscal Studies agrees households are worse off since the last election. And no sooner had the Chancellor sat down than the Energy Minister criticised a key plank of the energy plans on Twitter. The public's verdict is also in. A Snap poll revealed 3 in 5 voters think the government's plan is not working. The Sky News panel of 2019 Tory voters couldn't be more damning. Absolutely farcical, said one. They've got no plan, said another, who thought the budget was a great vote loser. A waste of time, and it's time for them to go, said a third. And that's because, on the big issues, this budget changes nothing. On taxes, for every 5p the government is giving, they are taking 10p in tax rises. Millions more middle-income families are paying more and more tax on their earnings, dragged into higher tax thresholds. Taxes going up to their highest level in 70 years. They hate it, but that's the reality, and that's the truth of this Conservative government. On the public finances, borrowing has been revised up, with the Chancellor's measures in the budget adding £4 billion to borrowing, with debt as a share of GDP at its highest level since the 1960s, borrowing to fund tax cuts. How irresponsible. On growth, after everything he announced was taken into account, growth forecasts were revised down from November. Growth figures would have been even worse were it not for higher predictions of net migration. They hate that too, but that's the truth. We are in a recession with the economy smaller than when the Prime Minister entered Downing Street, the biggest fall in living standards since records began, and real incomes below what they were at the last election. That's their record, and it's got the Prime Minister's name written all over it. Finally, Mr Speaker, disgracefully, there was no mention at all by the Chancellor of infected blood compensation or Horizon scandal redress. The slowness in righting these wrongs is raised here most weeks. The Business and Trade Select Committee's highly critical report out this morning calls for a legally binding timetable to deliver redress to sub-postmasters, taking it completely out of the hands of the Post Office. Does she agree? Given everything the leader has said on both these injustices, does she understand the anger that no new money has been allocated or a timetable given for these compensation schemes in yesterday's budget? Like with other measures, wasn't this omission just another short-term, cynical act, storing up problems for the next government to sort out? As ever, it's party before country, the final acts of a desperate, dying government.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, can I start by just noting that tomorrow is International Women's Day, and I would point out that on most Thursdays the primary players in this session are 3 women and sometimes a 4th in Speaker's chair. It is sometimes noted that in meetings women are often the last to speak, but I would argue that while that might be true, it is also equally the case that we are often the first to set the right tone and approach. Politics needs more of us, and I hope that the spirit of tomorrow will carry into this important political year. Turning to what the Honourable Lady has said about another female colleague of ours, she will no doubt be able to obtain details from the department in some of the questions that she has raised, but I would just remind the House, because what the Honourable Lady says is really probing the character of that Secretary of State. And I would remind this House that when the Honourable Lady was entitled to redundancy payments from being a Secretary of State, she did not, which was £16,000, she did not take that and handed it back to the department because it was the right thing to do. So I would just remind people of that, and I think that speaks volumes about the Honourable Lady's character and how much she values the fact that it is taxpayers' money that we are talking about. The Honourable Lady is channeling Elmer Fudd this morning, I see. Bugs may not have been in the Chancellor's hat, but support for businesses large and small was, help for households was, tax cuts for working people was, help for single earner families was, and holding down the price of fuel at the pump through another fuel duty freeze was, and we will ensure that that benefit is handed on to the consumer via Pump Watch. I'm not going to take any lectures from a Labour Party on stewardship of public services and getting growth into our economy. No lectures on tax cutting from a Labour Party that still has 28 billion of unfunded spending commitments which can only be delivered through tax rises in its plans. It was the Labour Party that left office with £71 billion in a black hole in the defence budget and equipment programme. It was Labour that brought in the fuel duty escalator and is clobbering the motorists in Wales and in London. It's the Labour Party in Wales that have cut the NHS budget, not once but 3 times, in contrast to the increases we have brought in and the further £6 billion announced yesterday. And it's Labour's NHS budget cuts is one reason why a quarter of the population in Wales are on a waiting list. I'm not going to take any lectures from Labour on council tax, which rose by 104% under their administration, and again in Labour has nearly tripled since they've been in power, while we reform welfare to make work pay, double the personal allowance, cut national insurance, and have protected jobs and livelihoods through furlough. Labour think it's a good use of taxpayers' money to give asylum seekers £1,600 a month. And I'm not going to take any lectures from the Labour Party on supporting those earning least from a party that brought in the 10p rate. The Honourable Lady's rhetoric on growth and modernising our nation does not match her party's agenda to unpick 40 years of trade union reform, tie business in red tape, or sit well with their voting record on minimum service levels for the British public. Nor am I going to take any lectures from a party that did the square root of diddly squat for victims of infected blood and the post office. And on that precise point, the Honourable Lady clearly hasn't read the Red Book. Just on the Horizon scandal on page 24, it commits us to paying full compensation. The estimates are in there, but it also says it will be increased if needed. This is a tough shift. Post-pandemic and mid-war, it is a tough shift, but thank God it is our shift. Our country has turned a corner, and we are going to get back to our inflation target sooner, as the new forecasts indicate. The plan is working, and we are going to stay that course, and we must. Otherwise, we are going to end up back where Labour brought us to. Compared to today, that's 1 million more workless households, 400,000 more children, and 200,000 more pensioners in absolute poverty, 4 million fewer in work, youth unemployment at 45%, literacy rates trailing rather than leading the world, and a third less spending on the NHS. No thank you, Shadow Leader. We're going to stick with the Prime Minister's plan. Further business will be announced.
James Daly.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. The Mayor of Greater Manchester's vanity project, the 493 square mile clean air zone, has cost the taxpayer nearly £100 million. £100 million, supported by all Labour councillors in Greater Manchester and all Labour councillors in Bury. Would my right honourable friend make time for a debate to ensure that the voice of Conservative MPs who have campaigned against this ridiculous project can be heard again, and that this tax on hard-working people never sees the light of day?
Leader of the House.
Well, can I congratulate my honourable friend who has been leading the charge on this matter. Although there is a legal obligation to achieve compliance with emissions in the shortest possible time, we are reviewing that, and he also will know that Greater Manchester authorities are now changed their tune and are proposing an entirely different approach. I think that the campaign that he has run and the support that he has galvanised amongst his communities is the reason why that is being done, and I would congratulate him and encourage him to hold them to account.
SNP spokesperson Richard Thompson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Following the frankly appalling behaviour of the leadership of the Labour Party in disrupting the SNP's Opposition Day debate on the 21st of February, don't like the truth, obviously. The leader told the House that she was sympathetic not only to the idea that the SNP should get another Opposition Day debate, but also that it should be taken from the allocation given to the Labour Party. I just wonder if she could update the House on how her thinking has developed on those points. Further to that, Mr. Speaker, I'd like to address the issue of ministerial responsibility. So yesterday it was revealed that the Conservatives have a branch manager in Holyrood and also an energy minister in government, neither of whom appear to support this government's energy policy. So can the leader confirm, does the principle of collective responsibility in government also apply to junior ministers? And if so, what advice would you give to any ministers who's unable to support such a key plank of government policy, either publicly or in any budget votes ahead? Now, finally, Mr. Speaker, the Secretary of State for Science, Innovation and Technology has cost the taxpayer £15,000 after falsely accusing an academic of supporting Hamas. So could we have a debate on the limits of privilege, and specifically whether it's now the policy of the government that ministers can say whatever they like outside of Parliament and they will be financially indemnified from the consequences of doing so with the taxpayer, and whether she considers that it is now the job of the taxpayer to underwrite financially the Conservative Party's culture wars whenever they overstep the mark?
Leader.
Well, can I thank the honourable gentleman for his questions. With regard to future opposition day debates, he knows that, and I've spoken to the leader of his party in Westminster regarding this, that we will give more time to the SNP. I think that they were badly treated and we will make that right. As I have explained, I also want to ensure that the Procedure Committee looks at what happened, because I do not want minority parties to receive more time on the floor of this House, but be in any doubt about how those debates will be conducted. I understand Mr. Speaker has written to the Procedure Committee just to ask them to do a quick piece of work, and I will announce future Opposition Day debates for the SNP, and I hope that they will have confidence in what the Procedure Committee says in going forward. With regard to the issues he raises about particular measures in the budget, we have a balanced budget. That is why the Chancellor has made the decisions that he had. It is the government's budget and the government's plan, but I think it is rather cheeky of the honourable gentleman to seek to lecture us about use of public funds. I refer him to what I said about the Secretary of State for Science earlier on. The SNP are legendary in this respect. I had wrongly assumed actually that the appalling Willy Wonka experience in Glasgow had been laid on by the SNP, given its high cost, poor return, and the fact that the police were called. But, however, the presence of a bouncy castle put pay to that theory, given that bouncy castles have been banned by the SNP local authorities on health and safety grounds.
Joe Bradley.
Mr Speaker, the lives of people across North Staffordshire have been blighted for far too long by the stench coming off Wally's Quarry landfill site in Newcastle-under-Lyme. There's delight that the Environment Agency has now issued a suspension notice. Will my right honourable friend join me in paying tribute to our honourable friend from Newcastle-under-Lyme for the work he has done on this incredibly important issue? And given, Mr Speaker, I know this is an issue that affects communities up and down the country, including yours, could the Leader of the House find time for a debate on the issue of landfill sites?
Well, can I thank my right honourable friend for raising this very important point. It is unacceptable that residents in Newcastle-under-Lyme have for far too long had to put up with these appalling smells emanating from the particular quarry, and she is absolutely right to pay tribute to our honourable friend, the honourable member for that area. He has raised this many times in this House. He has been fighting for his constituents. I think he secured 2 Westminster Hall debates on this matter, and it is in very great part down to his efforts this is being resolved.
Backbench Chair Ian Manns.
Very grateful, Mr Speaker. Mr Speaker, can I thank the Chair of the Procedure Committee for a very timely and affirmative response to our request to examine Westminster Hall standing orders. And I think, so to that end, Mr Speaker, I've actually written to the Leader of the House this morning, and hopefully we'll get a similarly timely and affirmative response from the Leader of the House on that particular instance. We would, of course, as a committee, welcome applications for debates from members across the House, and particularly for Westminster Hall, where we would probably be able to facilitate members with debates in the aftermath of the Easter recess. I think until Easter recess we're pretty well booked up, but that's as far as I need to go this morning, Mr Speaker.
Can I thank the honourable gentleman again for his very helpful advert for his committee. He knows that I very much agree with both his ask and the advice of the Procedure Committee, and so we will make this very good innovation the case very swiftly.
Teresa Willis.
Can we have a debate on defending the environment and quality of life in the London suburbs? TfL and its development partner Ballymore want to build 25 tower blocks in Edgware Town Centre, including a 29-storey skyscraper. This is completely unacceptable and inappropriate. The Mayor of London must demand that TfL withdraws from this project, and we need a debate to make that point to him.
Well, can I thank my right honourable friend for raising this? It's clear all communities want to ensure we have new homes being built. That is very important. But we've got to make sure that they are of the right type, that they're not affecting the character of a particular area, and the needs of local people and their views are taken into account. I know the Honourable Lady has been campaigning very hard against these matters, and that development really does need to be more gentle in the density that is being suggested for it to be in keeping with the local character. Can I congratulate her and the Save Edgware campaign, which is absolutely working flat out to ensure that the character of that community can remain, and I stand ready to assist her as she progresses that campaign.
Bill Ribeiro-Addy.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. This week, the 9th of March, marks 10 years since the death of my dear friend Adra Annan. She was just 28 years old. Adjoa had sickle cell anemia, the UK's fastest growing genetic condition, but her untimely death was actually the direct result of serious failings in her care. Her experience and those of many others are outlined in the landmark Sickle Cell Society and APPG report, No One's Listening. However, since its publication in 2021, the government has failed to meaningfully engage with its findings and recommendations. Mr. Speaker, it cannot be right that 10 years after we lost Adjoa, those with sickle cell and thalassemia continue to experience inequalities in treatment, substandard care and avoidable deaths. So I want to ask the Leader of the House when we can expect the government to finally listen and put forward policy that implements in full the recommendations of the No One's Listening report.
Well, can I start by thanking the Honourable Lady for remembering her friend Adjoa and allowing us all to pause and pay tribute to her friend, and thank her also for raising the important work that the APPG did on this matter. The next health questions is not until later April, so I will write on the Honourable Lady's behalf to the Secretary of State for Health and ask her to respond directly to the Honourable Lady.
Ian Liddell-Granger.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I wonder if we could have a debate in government time. It would be nice to actually talk about Mid Devon. I've talked about it before, I know, but it's now got to be beyond a joke. There is no planning enforcement in Mid Devon now. They've all gone. It is a free-for-all for developers. But second, much more importantly, they've gone to 3 weekly waste collection, which isn't a problem, except it's been totally taken over by a sort of draconian 1984 group of councillors who are determined to make the lives of the people of Tiverton and Mid Devon impossible. The Chair of Scrutiny, who I think is now incompetent and lazy, is doing nothing to scrutinise any of this. We can't have local government being run by people who seem to be out to actually make the lives of local people miserable. Therefore, could we please have time to have a debate on local government in the future?
Well, it is sometimes said in response to questions that I refer the honourable member to the answer I gave some moments ago. I think the honourable gentleman could just stand up every week and refer me to the question that he asked last week. He is assiduous in his campaigning to highlight the failures of his local authority, and I expect to see him next week doing exactly the same thing.
We're Hobhouse.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Passengers must feel confident when making train journeys. In the last 2 weeks alone, there were major cancellations on South Western trains and mass delays on Southern Rail and Thameslink. At the same time, rail fares rose by nearly 5% on Sunday. Everybody is paying more for less. Is it not high time we have a debate in government time on how we can support our crumbling rail infrastructure?
Yeah. Well, the Honourable Lady will know that the Department has made recent announcements on quite considerable uplifts to rail infrastructure. I know that there have been particular issues with South West trains with regard to the service that they're putting on and also the quality of their rolling stock. The next question session with the Secretary of State is not for some time, so I will, on the Honourable Lady's behalf, raise her concerns with him and ask that officials from his office get in touch.
Dr. Matthew Wolf.
Mr. Speaker, the RAF Museum in Colindale is one of London's premier tourist attractions, and many who visit do so by using the tube. However, TfL and the Mayor of London have decided that the works to upgrade Colindale Tube Station necessitate a 6-month closure. This would be dire not only for commuters but also for visitors to the RAF Museum. Can we have a minister come to the dispatch box to talk about what they can do to advise the assistance that can be provided to mitigate yet more unintended consequences from the disastrous mayor?
Well, can I thank my honourable friend for raising this very important point? It is an amazing museum. I was recently there at the RAF Gallantry Awards dinner, and I think that at most times this would be a very unfortunate thing to be happening to one of our most impressive national museums. But I think in this year there are particular anniversaries that are coming up which mean that people will want to visit that and particularly look at reconnaissance aircraft and so forth that are there. He will know that this is a matter that is devolved to the Mayor of London, but I know that he has done a service by getting concerns of many people on record today, and I shall also make sure that the relevant departments have also heard his concerns to see what pressure can be brought to bear on Transport for London and the Mayor of London.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The budget means net tax cuts of £9 billion taking effect in an election year, but this is dwarfed by £27 billion of tax increases that have taken effect last year and £19 billion tax rises which will come into effect after the general election because of the actions of her party. The Chancellor has given with one hand, taken with the other. Does the Leader of the House think her party is fooling anyone?
Well, she will know, and I would encourage her to reread the Chancellor's speech yesterday as to what progress we are making, both in terms of growth, inward investment into this country. This year, the Investment Summit had a record amount of money being put into this nation, over £30 billion just garnered in that particular week. And she will know that we had revised forecasts yesterday in terms of us returning to our target for inflation. These are tough times, but the plan is working and we are determined to see hard-working families through it.
Bob Black. Speaker, before the pandemic, TfL's finances were in a complete mess because the Labour Mayor of London refused to raise fares in line with inflation. Now, after receiving the final instalment of the £6.2 billion of coverage for under COVID from the government, he freezes fares again, refuses to pay the police the money they need to reform and keep London safe, and raises the council tax precept by 8.7%. So could my right honourable friend arrange for time for a debate so that we can point out the errors of the London Mayor and put us on the course for proper governance in London?
Well, can I thank my honourable friend for again raising the appalling maladministration of the Mayor of London. Londoners are paying more to prop up the Mayor's budget, not just in the increased headline rates, but also in a whole series of stealth taxes and fines that are being levied. But even the most fundamental services have an enormous black hole in their budgets. It's an absolute scandal, and I hope that Londoners will rectify that situation in the coming months.
Andy MacDonald.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The sorry saga of Tees Works continues, including the mysterious £20 million paid out to the joint venture partners over rubble, and putting to one side the Levelling Up Secretary's bizarre hailing of Lord Ouchins as Teesside's best champion since Sunderland won the FA Cup in 1973. Whilst she might want to send a colleague a map of the North East, could she prevail upon him to come to the House and make a statement and explain how his comment that with £560 million of public money so far invested, providing eye-watering incomes for the joint venture partners without putting in any money of their own is in any way consistent with his claim that the remediation of the site was achieved by bringing in private investment. There hasn't been any such private investment. The taxpayer has paid for the lot. So could the leader please ask the Secretary of State to come to the House and explain himself?
Well, I would dispute what the honourable gentleman says, and I think it goes to the heart of his prejudices against private sector involvement. I would say that the proof of the pudding is in the eating. The employment rate in Teesside is now 3% over the national average, and I'm sorry the honourable gentleman doesn't welcome that success. We do, and we want it to continue.
Andrew Rossell.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, sir. The Leader of the House will be fully aware that I welcome the Prime Minister's remarks outside number 10 Downing Street last week when he said that it's not enough to live side by side. We must live together, united by a shared commitment to this country. He's right. Immigration is only successful when integration is successful. So, in light of that, Will the Leader of the House agree to a debate on the floor of the House concerning a new proactive integration strategy, ensuring that those who come to Britain are encouraged to learn English, become part of UK communities and embrace British values? Does she agree that we need a coherent UK integration policy?
Well, can I thank my honourable friend for raising this very important point. I know that the Home Office have done work in this area, and he will know that there have been previous initiatives by other departments, such as the Department for Levelling Up, in terms of providing language classes and so forth. I think also the Home Office have been focused on those that have leave to remain here and choose to make their home here, but are not citizens of this country, and looking at actually whether we need a more robust and more proactive stance towards citizenship and all the things that it brings and all the things that it means to us.
Okay.
Despite my Airdrie and Shotts constituent John being born in North Lanarkshire and living in Scotland his whole life, he had to apply to become a British citizen, pledge his allegiance to the King and pay £260 for the process of applying for a passport because he doesn't have access to his mother's birth certificate. Will the Leader of the House make way in government time for MPs to raise and debate various passport issues? Can she outline if she's aware of any recourse for my constituent to be reimbursed?
Well, I would be very happy to facilitate for the Honourable Lady a meeting between Home Office officials and her office, or indeed herself, to talk about this case in particular, and also anything that the department can learn from John's experiences of going through this process. He will know that we have clear line of sight reporting on the costs that are charged for particular things, but if there has been some injustice in this respect, I'm sure that meeting will help rectify the situation.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Last week saw the launch of the independent report that I, together with the DWP and the leading research charity Autistica, prepared as a result of a 10-month review into autism and employment. There is still a huge gap in terms of the number of people in work. Under 3 in 10 adults who are autistic are working. That is way below the disability average. I'm grateful to the Backbench Business Committee for allocating time for a debate here in the Chamber on the report and its findings in April. Will my right honourable friend use her good offices to ensure that that time is preserved as much as possible, and that colleagues from across the House can debate the important recommendations raised in my report?
Well, can I first of all thank my right honourable friend for all the work that he has done on this particular report, but on many other areas that are of deep concern to people with autism and their families. This is a landmark report. It is wonderful to hear that it is being debated on the floor of the House. I will ensure that that time is protected and that nothing happens to it. And I would also congratulate my colleagues at the Department for Work and Pensions for the work that they have done and the proactive way they have commissioned these findings.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Yesterday, after the budget, Kate Burt, the Chief Executive of the Haemophilia Society, said this: "Today, Chancellor Jeremy Hunt could have reassured those infected and affected by contaminated blood products that resources for long overdue compensation would be made available. Instead, like so many chancellors before him, he ignored this issue, deepening the anxiety, anger and frustration caused by his government's failure to take responsibility for this long-running injustice. We deplore this cowardly and morally bankrupt attempt to kick the payment of compensation beyond the next general election." I know the leader cares very deeply about this issue, and she will be as disappointed as I am about the failure to put anything into the budget. Can we please now have a statement from the Paymaster General as to exactly what he is doing? He's not talking to those infected or affected. He's not taking soundings from any of the campaign groups. He's appointing people and we're not allowed to know their names to advise him. It's time for a statement. It's time to know what the government is actually doing.
Well, can I thank the Honourable Lady again for raising this important point, and I am very happy to set the record straight on this. It is not the intention to kick the can down the road on this. The Paymaster General and I have a weekly update on this. He is working very hard. I know the Honourable Lady will appreciate that this is, throughout all of this process, this is the hardest bit to actually come up with the scheme in short order and ensure that it is going to deliver for those infected and affected by this matter. I think that the House will not have to wait long before it is updated by the Paymaster General, and I already know that he is planning a tour across the UK to meet with particular groups, and I hope that he will be able to update the Honourable Lady on that very swiftly. This is a moral issue. We have taken it seriously. That is why we did the inquiry. That is why we did the compensation review. And I know that the Paymaster General will have to balance the issues that the Honourable Lady raises against being swift on this matter. He feels it very deeply, and he will deliver for this House and all of those victims.
Sir Michael.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Tomorrow is International Women's Day, and today marks 5 months since the barbaric Hamas attack on Israel. Of the 134 hostages still cruelly held by Hamas, 19 are women, and of those, 5 are teenage girls. Now, will my right honourable friend join me in marking International Women's Day by supporting the campaign that's called #BringBackOurGirls? And will she take this opportunity to send a message to their families who are enduring unimaginable pain and the living nightmare of young women in the hands of vicious, rapist terrorists?
Well, can I thank my right honourable friend for affording the whole House the opportunity to send a message to the families of all the hostage families that they are still very much in our thoughts. Of those women and girls still kept hostage, the youngest is 19, the oldest is 70, and we can only imagine the horrors that they are facing. This week, the UN published their report on the sexual violence suffered by Israeli women and girls on the 7th of October. They looked at over 5,000 photographs and over 50 hours of footage of those attacks, and they concluded that there was evidence at the Nova Music Festival of rape, gang rape, and murder. It is the most appalling situation. I'm glad that the UN now have that evidence on record and have produced that report. We cannot let these poor women and girls suffer what they must be suffering a moment longer. We must bring them home, and I'm sure that is the sentiments of everyone in this House.
Ashley Dalton.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Constituents in West Lancashire have this week been deeply concerned about the threatened closure of our dial-a-ride service. Yesterday I learned that unlike Conservative-led Lancashire County Council, Labour-led West Lancashire Borough Council has managed to find some additional funds for this year, and Dial-a-Ride has announced that it will be able to continue for the following financial year. Could we please have a debate about the impact of over a decade of cuts to local government on the valuable community and voluntary sector that all our constituents rely upon?
Well, the voluntary and community sector is thriving. 13 million Brits volunteer every single month. And the services that the Honourable Lady talks about are incredibly important. Different councils will be doing different things. Some have dial-a-ride services, others have tokens for taxis, depending on whether they are urban or rural. This is incredibly important, and she will know that we have, at the Department for Culture, Media and Sport, spent an enormous amount of focus in supporting the community and voluntary sector through new initiatives like the National Citizenship Programme. But I will make sure that the relevant department has heard her concerns.
Paul Howe.
Mr. Speaker, following on to the question from the member for Kingston upon Hull North, really, my Sedgefield constituent Dave Farry from Furry Hill is one of many that's been impacted by the infected blood scandal. I understand that we're nearing the final compensation settlement for victims of this appalling scandal. Could the Leader please advise me on how people are best able to engage with ministers on this subject?
Well, can I thank my honourable friend for raising this matter on behalf of his constituents. As I outlined earlier, the Paymaster General is very keen not just to bring forward proposals in swift order, but also to meet directly with those infected and affected by this, to hear their views and to get feedback on the scheme and ensure that it is going to meet with their approval. The 5 meetings round the country, and I know that the Paymaster General feels very strongly that that is the right thing to do, and I will make sure that he has heard the Honourable Gentleman's interest on behalf of his constituent and that he is updated as soon as those dates and venues are able to be announced.
Afzal Khan.
Mr. Speaker, as you know, Manchester has a proud history of welcoming those seeking sanctuary, but the Home Office is failing to provide support for the move-on process for those who have been recently granted asylum. Since April 2023, there has been a 575% increase on the number of people who have presented to Manchester City Council as homeless because the Home Office has evicted them. The government expects local authorities and the voluntary sector to fill the gap they are leaving, but without providing the resources to do so. Councillor Craig, Leader of Manchester City Council, has written to the Secretary of State to raise this. So can we have an urgent debate in government time on support offered to newly recognised refugees?
Well, I would be very happy to raise this matter with the Home Office and ask for a meeting on behalf of the Honourable Gentleman. The local authorities do have a great deal of flexibility in terms of who they take and under what circumstances they take them, and indeed where they actually provide accommodation. So I'm not sure quite what the underlying issue is with the Honourable Gentleman, but I would be very happy to facilitate him discussing this with the Home Office.
Martin Vickers.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Along with my honourable friends from Gainsborough and Grimsby, we have a long-running campaign to restore the direct train service between Cleethorpes and King's Cross, which would serve our 3 constituencies. We know that the Department of Transport have approved this. The Budget Red Book has a couple of sections that could include that service. Could the Leader of the House arrange for the Rail Minister to come and make a statement to clarify whether or not the Cleethorpes service is included?
Well, can I thank my honourable friend for all the work that he has done on this very important service to his constituents, which is going to bring massive benefits to the area. I can absolutely confirm that we are committed to up. I understand that work is still required to assess what infrastructure changes are needed at the stations that are going to be involved, and that further operational readiness activities need to take place before those direct services can be introduced. But I will ensure that the Rail Minister has heard what he has said today and will contact the Honourable Gentleman to give him assurances.
Stephen McKenna.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's been reported that taxpayers have had to pick up the bill of £15,000 due to the actions of the member for Chippenham, who's rapidly becoming known as the member for chipping in. Could the Leader of the House confirm that amount of £15,000, and could she also say whether she thinks it's fair that taxpayers should be footing the bill for the disgracefully bad judgment and behaviour of her colleague?
Well, the Honourable Gentleman is an experienced parliamentarian, and he will know that each department will have an officer, the Perm Secretary, and a monitoring officer for the department that ensures that any such payments are correct and proper and justified. There is also the Propriety and Ethics team at the Cabinet Office which oversees such things. So I'm pretty confident, having not been directly involved with this myself, that what has happened is perfectly correct and has been done. What the Honourable Gentleman is getting at is it right? And I would just again point the Honourable Gentleman to what that particular Secretary of State has done herself in other circumstances. She very much understands that it is taxpayers' money, and she has taken action in the past to turn down things that she was entitled to because she felt it was morally wrong to take them.
Christine Jardine.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. I hope the Right Honourable lady knows that I am not a fan of the go for the player rather than the ball type of politics, which is so popular with so many in this place. But following so many comments today, I have to say that I think as public servants, we owe the public the right to question whatever we do. And I fully respect what the Right Honourable lady has said about the Right Honourable member for Chippenham turning down payments such as her redundancy after 2 days as Education Secretary. However, the question is not going to go away until the public have the right to question. There is also the issue, I think, of whether the ministerial code was breached in any of what has happened. The Prime Minister promised us a government of transparency. So would she please take to clarify the situation, if nothing else?
Well, I completely understand the legitimate issues that the Honourable Lady is raising. She has a reputation of playing the ball and not the man or woman, and I completely take her question in the spirit that I think it is intended. What I can say to her is that from what I know of the situation, and because of the oversight that is given to these matters, that this has been completely in line with the rules, and I would again refer her to what I have said about the character of the individual.
Martin Cordova.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Listening to the Chancellor's budget this week, you'd think that everything is rosy despite our country being in a recession. However, Mr Speaker, the narrative flies in the face of the daily reality of workers and businesses. So does the Leader of the House accept that this government can't escape from their dismal economic record of the last 14 years?
Well, I would ask the Honourable Lady to reflect how she thinks the hard-working people of this country will cope with having to plug a £28 billion hole in Labour's spending plans, which could only be raised if they're sticking to their fiscal rules by raising taxes.
Patricia Gibson.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Scotland's baby box is delivered to every baby born in Scotland, packed full of baby essentials from birth to 6 months, helping parents to give their child a positive start in life. Scotland also has the largest free book giveaway for children of any nation on earth through the book gifting programme, giving every child free 4 packs of books between birth and primary 1, as well as a Scottish Child payment of £25 per week per child for our poorest families. None of these things are available anywhere else in the United Kingdom. Will the Leader of the House make a statement setting out her views on the importance of ensuring that every child has the best start in life, recognising that it is government's job to address inequalities as much as it can with the powers it has to build a more cohesive and fairer society?
Well, I've no quibble with any of the issues the Honourable Lady raises, but I would also say it's the duty of governments to ensure that people have public services that they can rely on, that the police can attend burglaries and other such things, that people can have access to the healthcare that they need, and that also that their ambitions with regard to the growth of the economy in their local communities are also supported. And unfortunately, her government in Scotland is not doing those things.
Andrew Weston.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My constituent Michelle is a cancer survivor who has campaigned for years on the issue of access to NHS dentistry for cancer patients. I have made frequent attempts to secure a debate on this matter and will continue to do so. But I wondered if the Leader of the House would allocate some government time to discuss this important issue, given the fact that chemotherapy can have a traumatic impact on one's dental health and the resulting impacts that this has in future life for those who are able to survive cancer is incredibly significant.
Well, I know that my right honourable friend, the Minister with responsibility for dentistry, and who has brought forward a new dental plan, an uplift, but also new things for the NHS in England, such as mobile dentistry vans. She is very focused particularly on those people who are perhaps disproportionately affected because of other issues. That includes cancer patients, it includes looked after children, it includes women who were pregnant during the pandemic and couldn't access free dental care during those particular times. She is very focused on that. We do have some new opportunities with this new dental plan and the changes to actually how payments are going to be made to ensure that everyone in our nation is dentally fit. I think a debate on that matter would be very welcome, and I know the honourable gentleman knows how to apply for one.
Andrew Bridget.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Public petition 648609 called for a debate on ending the UK's membership of the World Health Organisation. It was refused by the Petitions Committee despite well exceeding the 100,000 threshold of public support. So can we please have a statement on why this House is determined to give away sovereign powers to an unelected, unaccountable, non-tax-paying, diplomatically immune from prosecution organisation whose current Director General was only appointed through an unholy alliance of Bill Gates and the Chinese Communist Party. And perhaps the Leader of the House would say why the WHO, the World Health Organization, has joined excess deaths and vaccine harms as things we just can't talk about in this House.
Well, I think there is enough to worry about and focus on and debate about health-related issues and all sorts of other issues without inventing crises and drama where there is none. The honourable gentleman has already acknowledged in his question that the petition he refers to is a matter for the Petitions Committee. That is a committee of this House. I am not responsible for the decisions it takes. I will facilitate and help the honourable gentleman secure debates, raise questions and anything else that he wants to do on any topic that he wishes to campaign on. And he will know, because he has secured debates in this place, and indeed they have been well attended debates, that this House is very open to discussing all sorts of issues, including the World Health Organization, including the treaty that I know the honourable gentleman is concerned about. So let's just focus on the real issues and the substance and matters at hand, and not pretend that this House or anyone in it or any of its committees has any other hidden agenda, because the honourable gentleman knows that is not true.
Barry Shearman.
Deputy Speaker, does the Leader of the House agree with me that this is probably the most perilous time in the world, that certainly in my long time in this House of Commons? Does she agree with me also that this House needs to be up to date on what's happening in the world? And would she, could I share with her the fact that last week I had to watch the Foreign Secretary on television in the House of Lords to be informed about what our foreign policy was and what he was doing. Now, I understand that there was no one seen fit to be Foreign Secretary on those benches, and they had to go to the House of Lords. But can we have more regular debates and statements? Because this isn't right in this elected House of Commons to have no Secretary of State that comes here and answers in these perilous times.
Well, first of all, I would say to the honourable gentleman, I would implore on him to recognise the merits of the Minister for the Foreign Office, who has been at this dispatch box an enormous number of times, and also to acknowledge that the Foreign Secretary, who obviously does sit in the House of Lords, has made himself available to honourable members on a whole raft of issues, and in particular those honourable members who have been affected by what is going on in Israel and Gaza. He will know that the Procedure Committee has made further recommendations on how this House can scrutinise the Foreign Secretary, and the House of Lords will shortly, I'm sure, take a decision on their recommendations.
Ruth Cadbury.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Despite short-term tax cuts yesterday, families across the country know that they are worse off than they have been for 14 years. That they're worse off than they were 14 years ago. So why won't the Leader of the House urge the Prime Minister to call an election and let the British people give their views on this government?
Well, what the Honourable Lady says, I'm afraid, is not the case. We have got an enormous number of people into work, and the best way for people to lift themselves out of poverty is through work. 2 million of that 4 million are women. 1 million of them are disabled people who would have not had the dignity of a pay packet unless we had brought through welfare reforms that made work pay and supported people in work. We have an enormous childcare package which under the previous Labour administration they went nowhere near, and we know that those people living in absolute poverty has reduced pensioners by 200,000, children by 400,000. On any measure, the country is doing better. It has more opportunities in the future because of the things that we have been doing in education. We are soaring up the international literacy tables. We have reformed post-16 education to enable people to get degrees without getting into massive amounts of debt, which is what happened under the Honourable Lady's party. What she says is not true, and that's why we need to stay the course and stick with this government.
Kevin Brennan.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Last week I raised Sue Sparks, my constituent whose husband died as a result of the infected blood scandal. Now I know the Leader of the House, because she referred to it earlier, has got a copy of the Red Book with her. Could she point to the line in the Red Book where the Chancellor has set aside any resource to deal with the compensation that she knows and he knows will have to be paid as a result of the blood-infected scandal? Isn't that a moral obligation on the Chancellor, to this House, to my constituent and to all those affected by this scandal?
The Honourable Gentleman will know that provision has been made for this. The final scheme is being worked on. And I can understand why people want to raise this issue. It's a moral issue, and it stirs very understandable passions. But I would just caution honourable members to recognise that, because I do think that honourable members know that the scheme is about to be brought forward. I have already announced today that the Paymaster General will be going around the country to talk to people directly about that and the plans that he is bringing forward. I care passionately about this issue, as I did when I gave evidence to the inquiry, and I do not want those who are victims of this appalling scandal to worry about what is going to happen. I want us to be able to reassure them, and so I hope I will be able to continue to do that every week. And I would ask honourable members who quite rightly want to know the detail of the scheme to just reflect that in the questions that they ask both myself and the Paymaster General.
Jim McMahon.
Thank you. Will the Leader of the House join me in congratulating Oldham Athletic Football Club owner Frank Rothwell on his sterling achievement in rowing the 3,000 miles across the Atlantic in aid of Alzheimer's Research UK in his 70s for the second time. He managed to raise over £350,000 for that charity, adding to the £1 million he's already fundraised previously on the first row. But will she also allocate time in government time to debate the very real issue of the near 1 million people who are affected by Alzheimer's in the UK and the funding and early diagnosis in support of that?
Well, as the Honourable Gentleman asked that question and revealed the full extent of his constituents' incredible achievements, there was an audible gasp, and I'm sure that as a consequence the whole House will want to join the Honourable Gentleman in congratulating him on these amazing achievements. I'm been very close to HMS Audacious, which is the Royal Navy's rowing team, which regularly rows the Atlantic. So I'm very familiar with the incredible ordeal that is. So doing it at 70 years old is utterly remarkable. And I congratulate him very deeply and thank the Honourable Gentleman for getting his concerns also raised about provision and care for those suffering from Alzheimer's. I shall make sure that the Health Secretary has heard what he said.
Kirsten Oswald.
Deputy Speaker, I welcomed the Chancellor's announcement that he would be taxing vaping products.
But I wonder why on earth it has to be left until 2026. I think it's very disappointing that in the same week that Laura Young, also known as Less Waste Laura, was named as Scottish Influencer of the Year for her fantastic environmental campaigning, including on banning disposable vapes, that this important tax measure has been so resoundingly kicked into the long grass. Now, I'm sure the House would want to join me in congratulating Laura, but can we also have a debate in government time on the imperative to move with more speed on taxing vapes, and perhaps we can make some time too to discuss the wholly unacceptable practice of vaping companies sponsoring sports strips.
Well, I thank the Honourable Lady for getting her concerns on record. I will raise the matter with both the Treasury but also the Health Secretary, but she will know that we are also hoping very shortly to bring forward legislation where which I'm sure, given what the Honourable Lady has said, that she would be happy to support.
Alex Cunningham.
Madam Deputy Speaker, my honourable friend, the member from Middlesbrough, referred earlier to the gaffe by the Levelling Up Secretary. He demonstrated his ignorance whilst on a visit to Teesside, referring to the heroes of Sunderland who won the FA Cup in 1973, when perhaps he should have been praising the 2004 League Cup winners, Middlesbrough. Instead of ignoring the matter, could she arrange a humanities lesson for the Minister so he can better understand the history and geography of the North East?
Very good. I take my responsibilities to all members of this House very seriously. I will immediately after this session go and raise with the Secretary of State and his special advisers and his officials what the Honourable Gentleman has said. And I think he will take from that, given all of the other issues the Honourable Gentleman might have raised in his question to me this morning, that he thinks the government is doing a very good job.
Justin Madders.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Can we have a debate, please, on personal responsibility? If I say or tweet something that is defamatory, I would expect to be responsible for the consequences of that, not the taxpayer. And I think that's what the public would expect as well. Now, the Leader's response to earlier questions suggested that somehow the Honourable Member for Chippenham had credit in the bank because she didn't take the redundancy payment that was offered to her, or that these payments are within the rules. If that is the case, then the rules are wrong, and that's why we need a debate.
Well, the Honourable Gentleman has hit on it. If the rules have been followed, if we're not questioning the character of the individuals, it must be the rules that are wrong. I will raise this with the Department and Permanent Secretary, but I can again reassure this House that these matters have considerable oversight, both from the monitoring officers in the departments, but also from the Propriety and Ethics team.
Waitford.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. This week, the 4th of March, marks the one-year anniversary of Anu Abraham's death. Anu was a young man with a bright future, and he should still be here. And after speaking to his family and seeing photos, he was one of the kindest individuals anyone would know, with a smile that would light up the room. Anu tragically took his own life following bullying whilst working as a trainee police officer, working for West Yorkshire Police. So can we have a debate in government time on police recruitment and the training of trainee police officers and their support packages, because lessons must be learnt, changes must be enacted and voices must be heard.
Well, can I thank the Honourable Gentleman for allowing us to get on record and remember Anu, clearly somebody that wanted to step up and serve in public service and serve his community, and his suicide is an absolute tragedy. I know that the police services in general, but in particular also that those responsible for training and ensuring that the right safeguarding and support is there for those particularly going through training, review these matters. And I know that the Home Secretary takes these matters very seriously, but I will say to the Home Secretary that the Honourable Gentleman has raised this particular matter today and ask that he is updated on progress to ensuring that this tragedy never happens again.
Gerald Jones.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I've been trying to amend the Road Traffic Act 1988 following the tragic loss of a one-year-old child, Pearl Black, from Merthyr Tydfil. Working with Pearl's parents, we're seeking this amendment to close a loophole that caused them huge distress. In November, the Prime Minister gave a commitment at PMQs to facilitate a meeting with a relevant minister, possibly from Transport or Justice, with Pearl's parents. Unfortunately, despite requests, that meeting still hasn't taken place. So could I ask the Leader of the House, please, to offer her assistance in securing a debate on how we can deliver the change and, crucially, how we can facilitate a meeting with Pearl's parents. Thank you.
I'm sorry to hear that that meeting hasn't happened, and I'm sure that transport ministers would want to facilitate that. So following this session, I will make sure that they have heard what the Honourable Gentleman has said and see whether we can rectify that.
Matt Weston.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Of course, tomorrow is International Women's Day, and it saddens me greatly that Warwickshire should have the worst conviction record for rape and serious sexual offences. Philip Seckham, our Police Crime Commissioner, was one of the few to cut domestic abuse units and close the RASO in Warwickshire. So can we have a debate in government time on the accountability and scrutiny of police crime commissioners?
Well, the Honourable Gentleman raises some very serious matters, and I would refer him to in particular what the Prime Minister said at Prime Minister's Questions this week with regard to the progress that has been made on supporting victims coming forward of these heinous crimes, but also the increased conviction rate that we want to see, particularly for rape and sexual assault. I think a debate on these matters would be excellent, because there is considerable variation between areas and what police crime commissioners are doing, and I would welcome that scrutiny.
Alistair Strathern.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. On Monday, I was out in Meppershall, where residents are fed up with the condition of the main road through the village. But like many villages, they've been told really needed roadworks can't take place until developments are finished. As reasonable as this may sound, as developments drag on and on and on, and with no end to future developments in sight, surely enough has to be enough. Could the relevant minister issue a statement about whether more guidance might be needed about the length of time it's reasonable for private developments to delay clearly needed public roadworks?
Well, I will certainly make sure that the relevant departments have heard the Honourable Gentleman's concerns today. He will know also that local authorities have been given a quite sizable uplift in road maintenance, particularly looking at things like potholes or resurfacing. On the 15th of this month, local authorities have to publish what they have done with that money, and I would encourage the Honourable Gentleman to scrutinise whether that money has been spent and spent on the right things.
Richard Ford.
Deputy Speaker, at the end of January, the government launched the Pharmacy First scheme, which encourages patients to consult pharmacists rather than GPs, or at least taking pressure off GPs. And while this is good in theory, the reality is that the community pharmacy workforce is on its knees, with levels of trained support staff having been cut by 20%. We're seeing the closure of pharmacies in rural and coastal towns like Axminster and Sidmouth, with a constituent telling me yesterday that queues at the pharmacy in Axminster are out the door. Will the government please make time for a debate on recognising the value of community pharmacies?
The government does recognise the value of community pharmacies. There could be no Prime Minister that is better placed to recognise the importance of pharmacy, and I think that is why not only have we enabled the Pharmacy First service to be stood up, we've been doing this for a number of years. It is now available to all members of the public, but there were trailblazer programmes prior to that for people who are on benefits. 98% of pharmacies now are making use of this, and it also enables them to derive an income from it. I think it is progress. It is to be supported and welcomed, and I hope the Honourable Gentleman will promote it in his constituency.
I thank the Leader of the House for the business questions. Point of order, Lillian Greenwood.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. It's been drawn to my attention that on Monday, the Honourable Member for Mansfield publicised his meeting with the leader of the Nottingham City Independents, which clearly took place in Old Market Square in my constituency. The Honourable Member have not notified me that he would be visiting Nottingham South. We all make genuine mistakes, Madam Deputy Speaker,
However, when I looked at the Honourable Member's social media feed, I became aware that this is the 4th public visit he has undertaken in my constituency since the beginning of February, none of which he has notified me of. I appreciate that he already has 2 jobs and is seeking a 3rd, but I would be very grateful for your advice on how the Honourable Member for Mansfield might be prevailed upon to follow the rules of behaviour and courtesies that apply to us in our jobs as members of this House.
Well, I'm grateful to the Honourable Lady for her point of order and for giving me notice of it. I am assuming she has informed the Honourable Member that she intended to raise this. This is an incredibly serious matter, and the Speaker reminded the House on the 22nd of January, when a member intends to visit another constituency other than in a private capacity, they should make every reasonable effort to inform the member representing that constituency before they do so. This applies in particular to public events and meetings. In addition, honourable members have a duty to look after the constituents who elected them to this place, and that boundary changes do not take effect until the next election, and we must observe the convention of not involving ourselves with another member's constituency until that time. I have had similar experiences, and I know how annoying it is. And it is also something that I think all sides of the House do need to observe. And we have the Leader of the House here. I know it is not strictly within her remit, but I'm sure she will take back the views expressed, as will the whips. But I do emphasise everybody has to stick to this, because otherwise, particularly in this year, things can get very fraught and difficult. So I think we'll leave it at that. Thank you. So we now come to presentation of bill, Mr. Chancellor of the Exchequer. Is somebody going to? You've nodded.
I'm not. National Insurance Contributions Reduction in Rates number 2 bill.
Second reading what day?
Monday next.
Monday next. Right, I think that's Monday the 11th, isn't it? Yes. Okay, thank you. The clerk will now proceed to read the orders of the day.
Ways and Means adjourned debate on question.
Now. The question is, as on the order paper, I call the Shadow Chancellor of the Exchequer, Rachel Reeves.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The stark reality of yesterday's budget is clear. Taxes rising, living standards falling, growth stalling. And yet again, making promises they can't deliver. The Tories have failed on the economy, they are out of ideas, and they are out of time. Let me turn first to the most and potentially only remarkable bit of the budget statement yesterday. After an hour and 10 minutes, the Chancellor seemed to float an idea of getting rid of national insurance altogether. I wasn't quite sure what I'd heard, but then government ministers started touring the TV and radio stations, saying that this was indeed their intention. In what seemed to be a casual afterthought, the Chancellor has made a £46 billion unfunded commitment, leaving a gaping hole in the public finances, even bigger than the unfunded tax cuts announced in the Tory kamikaze mini-budget just 18 months ago. So let me ask the Secretary of State this. How does the Chancellor plan to pay for the £46 billion tax pledge made yesterday? To be more precise, what is the Chancellor's assessment of the impact that £46 billion of tax cuts would have on borrowing, tax rises elsewhere, or on public spending? Or has he simply managed to find the same magic money tree that his predecessor was so fond of? Madam Deputy Speaker, This is an omni-shambles budget from a desperate Tory party. Instead of recklessness, Labour will take a different approach. As Chancellor, I will never make a commitment without saying where the money will come from. That is the responsible approach. Madam Deputy Speaker, let's turn now to the other tax cuts that the Chancellor announced yesterday. 2 years ago, when the current Prime Minister wanted to increase national insurance, we opposed it. Since then, I have consistently said that I want taxes on working people to be lower. And so, just as we supported the last cut to national insurance, we support the measures announced in the Chamber yesterday to bring it down by a further 2p. But let's be clear, these measures come in the context of a rising tax burden. The highest it has been in 70 years. And the tax burden is rising in each and every year of the forecast period. Under this government's plans, for every £10 that they are taking from families in higher tax, they are only giving £5 back. They are giving with one hand and taking twice as much with the other. And they expect people to be grateful. Now, as the Resolution Foundation have highlighted just this morning, I'll happily give way to my honourable friend.
Grateful to her for giving way. On that point, does she agree that the Prime Minister's tax plans will leave households on average £870 worse off under the Conservatives?
My honourable friend has done the maths, and she is absolutely right that by the end of the forecast period, the average family, when you take into account the changes to the tax thresholds, as well as the announcements yesterday and in November, and council tax as well, by the end of the forecast period, the average family will be £870 worse off. And as the Resolution Foundation have highlighted just this morning, if you are one of the 8 million tax-paying pensioners, you will see your taxes increase by an average of £1,000. That is a collective £8 billion tax grab from our nation's pensioners. And as Paul Johnson, the director of the Institute of Fiscal Studies, said yesterday, this remains a parliament of record tax rises. That is the legacy of this Conservative government. The Tory government's pickpocketing has meant higher taxes on working people, leaving them with less money at a time when their daily lives are getting more expensive. Yesterday, the Chancellor said that a person on average earnings is £900 better off. But let's take a look at that claim. What the Chancellor has ignored is not only his own stealth tax rises, with the tax thresholds and council tax, but also the rising cost of energy bills, food, mortgages and rent. In fact, rather than being better off, as the Chancellor claimed, household disposable income is set to fall by £200 per person over the course of this Parliament. I'll happily give way to the honourable gentleman.
I'm grateful to the Shadow Chancellor for giving me. I completely agree that it is a stealth tax to deliberately leave tax thresholds untouched at a time when pay and prices are increasing. It's a stealth tax when this Chancellor does it. There's also a stealth tax when Gordon Brown did it.
Well, it's interesting to have an intervention from the SNP, who are increasing taxes on ordinary working people. I would probably just stay on the benches. This is the only Parliament on record where living standards are set to be lower at the end of the Parliament than they were at the beginning. The Chancellor chose to ignore all of those realities, but the truth is, ordinary families cannot ignore them. As people up and down the country know, the definition of being better off is having more money. And under the Tories, people have less. People feel worse off because they are worse off. Now, Madam Deputy Speaker, let's look at economic growth. Growth is critical to our success as a nation, to our living standards and for providing sustainable funding for public services. But the Tories have failed here too. The context of yesterday's budget is a Prime Minister who pledged growth but has delivered recession. Yeah. This economy is now smaller than when the Prime Minister took up office. Now, instead of bouncing back, we see that the UK's GDP is bumping along the bottom this year. The Chancellor, in his statement, rightly elevated the true measure of success. Not just higher GDP, but higher GDP per head. I agree with the Chancellor. This is the most important yardstick. So how are the Tories doing against this measure? The reality is that GDP per capita is set to shrink, not grow, this year, after having shrunk, not grown, last year too. GDP per capita is now expected to be lower at the end of this year than it was at the start of this Parliament. And yesterday we learnt that forecast GDP per capita growth has been revised down for 4 of the next 5 years. Hardly the success that the Chancellor was looking for. Now, the Chancellor said that it was important not to follow a path which relied on net migration to provide growth in GDP. I agree. Has the Secretary of State seen the chart on page 29 of the OBR's Economic and Fiscal Outlook, which shows net migration has been revised up by 350,000 over the next 5 years? The exact opposite of what the Chancellor spoke about. Our country has gone through a difficult time these past few years. The origins of many of the crises we have faced are global: pandemic, war, energy crisis. Other countries have experienced these shocks too. But each time crisis has hit, Britain has found itself acutely exposed because of the choices of successive Conservative governments. Austerity that choked off investment. Then Brexit without a plan. And then the Tories crashed the economy with their kamikaze budget. This Tory record of economic failure has held back our country for far too long. If the UK had grown at the average of the OECD rate since 2010, when the Conservatives came to office, it would now be £140 billion bigger than it actually is today. That is equivalent to £5,000 per household every year. And it would mean an additional £50 billion in tax revenues to invest in our public services. Growth matters, but the Tories are incapable of delivering it. The Honourable Gentleman says from a sedentary position, we're doing better than the G7. There are only 2 G7 countries in recession today, us and Japan. That is their record, and they should be ashamed of it. This is the 12th Tory plan for growth in 14 years, and we still are in recession. From 5 Prime Ministers and 7 Chancellors, with none of them ever succeeding. We are trapped in a Tory doom loop of low growth and high taxes, and it is working people who are paying the price. I'll happily give way to the Honourable Gentleman.
I'm just struggling a bit with the Right Honourable Lady's figures. My own calculations suggest that pensioners this year will see an increase of £900 from an 8.2% increase in the state pension as a result of the triple lock. In all, since 2010, pensioners will be getting, I think it's £3,700 more than they were. That is a huge increase in their income, alongside all the cost of living help and winter fuel. And yet she was saying earlier that pensioners are going to be worse off. I don't follow the maths on this. Can she help?
Well, these are numbers about pensioners who pay tax from the Resolution Foundation that was published this morning. So the Honourable Gentleman can also look at those statistics. But it is the fact that because the tax thresholds have been frozen, pensioners who pay tax are paying more tax than they were before. That is the legacy of this government. Now, Madam Deputy Speaker, this isn't just about lines on a graph. It's about our high streets. It's about whether businesses grow. It's about whether we can create secure, well-paid jobs in all parts of the country with more money in the pockets of working people. Because if an economy does not work for working people, then it does not work at all. Madam Deputy Speaker, when the Tories are not pickpocketing the pockets of the taxpayer, they are pickpocketing Labour policies. Having spent years defending the indefensible, the Tories have belatedly listened to Labour and recognised the importance of closing the non-dom tax loophole. I believe if people make Britain their home, they should pay their taxes here too. The Office of Budget Responsibility says that the steady state amount of revenue raised by the non-dom policy is £3 billion per year. I first called for this loophole to be closed when it entered the public consciousness that some people weren't paying their fair share of taxes 2 years ago, meaning that we have missed out on £6 billion on tax revenue, money that could have been invested in our public services. And if any further proof was needed that Labour was winning the battle of ideas, it is our time-limited windfall tax on the oil and gas producers. Having originally opposed the creation of such a tax, the Tories were dragged kicking and screaming by Labour to create an energy profits levy. Even after yesterday's announcement of a one-year extension, the Tories are still leaving such gaping loopholes, which mean many energy giants will still pay less in tax. Meanwhile, the SNP oppose our proper windfall tax, while just 3 weeks ago putting up taxes on working people in Scotland, for teachers, nurses and plumbers too. I'll happily take another intervention if he wants to defend it. Higher taxes for working people. Oh, bring it on.
Does the Shadow Chancellor not understand that the SNP's position is that there should not be a single windfall tax that only punishes the North East of Scotland? It should also be applied to every sector that has profited from war, from COVID and from rising increases. And does she not understand that the SNP's income tax policy means that low-paid workers, the people the Labour Party are supposed to protect, pay less income tax in Scotland than they would do in England, as well as nurses and care workers getting paid more in Scotland than they do in England? That's true, isn't it?
Well, all I would say to the honourable gentleman is put that on your leaflet. The fact is that nurses, teachers and plumbers are paying more tax in Scotland, and at the same time, the energy giants who are making huge profits, the windfalls of war, will pay less tax under the SNP. That is their record, and they should be ashamed of it. Madam Deputy Speaker, Labour is committed to investing more in our schools and in our hospitals. That was a priority before the budget, and it remains a priority now, because public services are on their knees after 14 years of Conservative failure. Labour believes in aspiration for all of our children, and we will not stand by while the roof is falling in on state education under the Tories. History is repeating itself, with children again taught in porter cabins as they were when I was at school under a Tory government. When the Tories undervalue our young people, they are squandering their potential and undermining our whole country's future. That is why the next Labour government will close the tax loopholes enjoyed by private schools. The money raised from ending their exemption from business rates and VAT will instead go where it is needed, to help the 93% of children in our state schools instead. I will always be clear that all of our policies in our manifesto will be fully costed and fully funded. Now the Tories have U-turned on their policy on non-doms, which we welcome. We will do the necessary work to show how our plans will be paid for. We will set that out in an orderly and a responsible way. Our public services are in a mess under the Conservatives, but a Labour government will begin to turn them round with an immediate injection of cash into our schools and our hospitals, by tackling Tory waste, and with a serious plan to grow our economy to provide the sustainable finance that our public services need. Madam Deputy Speaker, it takes some nerve for the Chancellor to wag his finger at local councils this week, when the Tories and the Prime Minister have squandered billions of pounds of taxpayers' hard-earned money. Who has used excessive numbers of management consultants in central government? The Tories. Who signed the cheques and lost an additional £10 billion through dodgy PPE contracts? The Tories. Who left the vaults open so that organised criminal gangs could help themselves to £7 billion of public money through COVID fraud? The Tories. Who made a costly mess of HS2? The Tories. And who handed £500 million to the Rwanda government with nothing to show for it? The Tories. Meanwhile, maybe she has another example.
I thank my honourable friend for giving way, and she's absolutely right, because every dimension of Conservative spending is showing wasteful and profligate spending. Does she agree with me that the £15,000 of taxpayers' money spent to settle the Secretary of State for Science's attack on a British scientist, an entirely unfounded and defamatory attack, that money would have been so much better spent supporting British scientists to drive British economic growth?
I thank my honourable friend for that intervention, and I think that taxpayers will find it pretty grating when they see their own tax bill going up, and yet this money is spent so callously and so casually. Meanwhile, the Chancellor has failed to do the right thing yesterday by setting out in the budget compensation for those affected by the infected blood scandal or wrongly accused sub-postmasters. That is an abdication of responsibility and a betrayal of all of those who have fought for justice for so many years, and it will not be forgiven. Now, I am under no illusion about the scale of a challenge that we may inherit, nor the scale of the task to rebuild our economy and our country. Labour's economic plan will take Britain from instability and short-termism to a mission-based government, prioritising economic growth and security for families and our country. It is built on the pillars of stability, investment and reform. Stability brought about by iron discipline, guided by strong fiscal rules and robust economic institutions. Investment, working with the private sector so we can lead the industries of the future, with a modern industrial strategy and a new national wealth fund to invest alongside business in our automotive sector, in renewable-ready ports and in the future of our steel industry. And reform, starting with our planning system, taking on vested interests to get Britain building again, supporting working people to develop the skills they need to thrive in the changing world of work, to make work pay with a genuine living wage and a new deal for working people. Our economy needs change. Britain needs change. And the verdict on the budget is in. There is no long-term plan for growth, and leading business organisations agree. The Institute of Directors said that the budget fell short of delivering a comprehensive plan for sustainable growth. The British Retail Consortium said the Chancellor has done little to promote growth and investment. The Trades Union Congress have highlighted that real pay is still below where it was in 2008. Whichever way you look at it, the Tories have failed on the economy. The damage is done. Nothing this week will compensate for the fact that people are worse off under the Tories. Taking £10 and handing back £5 is a swindle, not a giveaway. Working people paying more, pensioners paying more, homeowners continuing to pay more, reckless and desperate promises being repeated. The lesson from the budget is simple. You cannot trust the Conservatives with the economy. And the questions that people ask ahead of the next election are simple. Are me and my family better off after 14 years of Conservative government? Do our schools, our hospitals, our police and our transport work better when the Conservatives came to office 14 years ago? Frankly, does anything in our country work better when the Conservatives came to power? And the answer to those questions is a resounding no. If the Tories had any confidence in their plans and their record, they would name the date of a general election. It is time for the British people to give their verdict on 14 years of Tory failure. Only Labour can provide the change that our country so desperately needs.
Before I call the Secretary of State, I do want to remind members that if you are going to intervene on another member, it is very important to stay till the end of their speech before leaving the chamber. It's very discourteous to leave before the speaker has finished. Just a reminder, I'm sure everyone will now stick to that rule. Secretary of State Mel Stride.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Well, the Right Honourable Lady commenced her remarks, of course, by saying much about where Labour is on tax. She criticised the aspiration that this government quite rightly has at some point in the future to abolish national insurance. Of course, she rather disingenuously repositioned it as a firm commitment rather than an aspiration, but we'll set that to one side. But she knows all about, of course, firm commitments, because we had the firm commitment from the Right Honourable Lady to £28 billion worth of spending every year over the period of the forecast. And of course, that didn't survive contact with reality. Indeed, Madam Deputy Speaker, the Right Honourable Lady has very little that is original to say. When she writes about economics, of course, she has to cut and paste from Wikipedia. And when she trumpeted her ruinous £28 billion spending plan, she had to ultimately £28 billion spending plan. She ultimately had to U-turn and run for the hills. It just shows, Madam Deputy Speaker, that this Shadow Chancellor, when it's not cut and paste, it's cut and run. She also, I thought you'd like that. She has also, of course, Madam Deputy Speaker, accepted our tax measures as set out in the budget yesterday, including the changes that we're making to the non-dom arrangements, the abolition of non-dom status and the windfall tax for oil and gas. Now, she has, Madam Deputy Speaker, of course, hypothecated the money raised from those two measures many times over for the NHS, for dentistry, for breakfast clubs and so on. Now she has accepted all the tax measures in the budget, and I invite her to come back to the dispatch box now. I will give way. Could she let us know whether she is now going to U-turn again, on the spending commitments that she has made around the NHS and dentistry, or whether she is going to put taxes and borrowing up? I'm very happy to hear from... All right, perhaps not. I'll take an intervention from the Honourable Lady.
I'm grateful to the Secretary of State for giving way. When he was the chairman of the Treasury Committee, he was very keen on OBR assessments and forecasts. And indeed, he argued for it before his then Prime Minister and then Chancellor failed to listen to him and crashed the economy. So in that spirit, can I ask that given the aspiration, as he calls it now, for scrapping national insurance contributions altogether, which would cost £48 billion a year, can he commit that if that aspiration is one that he and his government want to pursue, that he will seek an OBR forecast and an assessment and show how they will pay for it?
Well, Madam Deputy Speaker, let me just talk about the general point, indeed, which the Right Honourable Lady herself raised in her opening remarks about the tax burden. It is as if history has been erased from the Right Honourable Lady's mind. The fact that there was a COVID pandemic that shrank the economy overnight by 10%, that this government stepped in and supported jobs, saved 10 million jobs as a result of the intervention that we came forward with at that time. It is as if it has been erased from her memory. The fact that there is a war going on between Russia and the Ukraine, that this has led to an increase in energy prices and inflation, and this is the government that has stepped in to support the most vulnerable in society, families, pensioners, the disabled, up and down this country. And I ask her in all candour, £400 billion worth of support was provided by this government across that period. I don't believe on a single occasion she opposed any one of the interventions that we made. She was up for spending the money to support people, but she's now not up for recognising the fact that that has to be repaid, which is why it is indeed the case that the tax burden is increasing. But it is also the case, and to the Honourable Lady behind her's point about the OBR economic and fiscal outlook, that the OBR makes it quite clear that the measures taken yesterday in the budget mean that the tax burden itself will be at a lower level than was forecast in the autumn as a result of the management of the economy and the reduction in taxes that my right honourable friend, the Chancellor, has brought forward. And I will give way to the honourable lady.
I thank the Minister for giving way, and he might not be surprised that we on this side of the House take it a little unkindly that he would suggest that we were forgetting the past, when he seems to have forgotten the immediate past of the last Prime Minister and the state she left the British economy in just a year ago. And can he confirm how much extra in debt interest the government will be paying as a result of the Chancellor's unfunded commitment to abolish national insurance contributions at a cost of £46 billion?
That is an entirely disingenuous statement to say that there is any such unfunded commitment. The only unfunded commitment in recent times is the £28 billion that the Honourable Lady's party came forward with, that the Leader of the Opposition was described as along the lines of absolutely critical that we do this, only for the Right Honourable Lady, the Shadow Chancellor, to U-turn on that not long afterwards. Now, perhaps I could turn to the Right Honourable Lady's comments relating to pensioners. She neglects to point out that we have stood by the triple lock. She neglects to point out the fact that since 2010 there are 200,000 fewer pensioners in absolute poverty after housing costs as a result of this government, through many years, having a key priority to protect our pensioners. She has forgotten, amongst the many things that have been erased from the Right Honourable Lady's memory, that it was under Gordon Brown, when he was Chancellor, that we had the 75p increase in pensions on her watch. I give way to the honourable gentleman.
Can I thank the Secretary of State? On the issue of pensioners, the Chancellor this morning appeared to suggest that income tax and national insurance contributions will be merged as part of his commitment yesterday. As national insurance is not currently levied on some forms of income, will the Minister be able to confirm to the House how much extra tax this policy will mean that pensioners will pay as a result of the decisions the Chancellor has made?
Well, there is no immediate government approach to merging income tax or national insurance. I rather put that in the category of the comments about this apparent commitment of 46, although I think the Honourable Lady niched it up in a typical Labour way to 48 billion a moment ago. But could I turn now to the remarks that the Right Honourable Lady made in relation to growth? The recession, as she knows, a technical recession, 2 quarters of negative growth, one of which was the princely amount of 0.1%. Most of the PMI data, as she knows, makes it very clear that the economy is now on a very different path, and is indeed, to come back to the Honourable Lady sitting behind her comments, the OBR makes it very clear that over the period of the forecast there will be quite reasonable and decent growth, greater in fact than France, Italy and Germany, and that's on the back of exactly the kind of growth record that this government has indeed had since 2010. I'll give way to the honourable gentleman, the chair of the Select Committee.
I'm very grateful to the Secretary of State for giving way. On growth, it was the former Prime Minister, when she was seeking election as leader of her party, who characterised the growth record since 2010 as lamentable. And she was surely absolutely right about that particular point.
The point that I'm making is that the externalities that I referred to, such as COVID, such as the war between Ukraine and Russia, of course have impacted economies around the world. And the point that I'm making is relative to other economies. And if you look at the OBR's forecasts over the next 5 years, we will have a growth record that is up there and better than many of our major competitors, including countries such as Germany. But yes, I'll certainly give way to the honourable gentleman.
I thank the right honourable gentleman for giving way. But just to clarify a point that perhaps I've misunderstood, in terms of growth per capita, what is the record for the last 7 quarters?
Well, as we know, Madam Deputy Speaker, my point quite clearly remains, and that growth is a function both of the size of the population, quite clearly, and the level of productivity also, and that as a consequence of all the elements that feed into growth, the OBR has confirmed that we will be growing a little bit faster at certain times than was anticipated back at the time of the autumn statement, and that our growth will compare favourably, for example, to countries such as Germany. But this debate, of course, Madam Deputy Speaker, is meant to be about making work pay. And in fact, the Right Honourable Lady had very little, in fact next to nothing, to say about making work pay. I think she did mention, as she's saying from a sedentary position, that she mentioned the national living wage, something of which this party is very proud that it brought into being. And I'm very proud that almost... Now, you're thinking of the Honourable Gentleman, I think, is thinking of the national minimum wage. The national living wage was actually a Conservative decision. You did, but it's a pleasure to correct you on this occasion.
With conversations across the dispatch box like that, it's very difficult for the Hansard writers to follow. If we veer off into private conversations, it all comes through the chair. Secretary of State.
I'm sorry, Madam Deputy Speaker. I'm sorry for Hansard, but it was quite enjoyable having a little chat. But of course, this debate, Madam Deputy Speaker, is about making work pay, and the Right Honourable Lady had precious little to say about it. And I wonder why that might be. Might it be because unemployment has always gone up under Labour governments? That's a simple fact for her to think about. It rose by 1 million under the last Labour government. Youth unemployment, Madam Deputy Speaker, rose by 45% under the last Labour government. The number of households in which no one had ever worked doubled during the last Labour government. And this one I find particularly striking. Under Labour, 1.4 million people spent almost a decade on out-of-work benefits. That is not a record in office. That is a record of which they should be ashamed. And I will give way to the honourable gentleman.
Thank you. He mentions making work pay, but for many workers, they pay to work. Unison have pointed out that the number of social care workers are being disadvantaged because the HMRC marriage rates haven't changed since 2010. Yep. Does the Treasury not believe that the cost of running a motor vehicle has changed in the last 14 years?
Very good. Well, in terms of the cost of running a motor vehicle, of course, one of the principal costs is the fuel that you put in the tank. And what the Chancellor was able to announce yesterday, because of our stewardship of the economy, is that we're once again, for the 14th year in succession, freezing fuel duty, as well as beer duty, to help those that are going and supporting our vital pubs, as two examples. But, Madam Deputy Speaker, yesterday's budget sets the course to a brighter future for our country, a budget for long-term growth, more investment, more jobs, and with an economy that is, I will momentarily, turning the corner. And it has allowed us to cut taxes, because this government believes in rewarding aspiration and hard work. And I give way to the Honourable Lady.
Incredibly grateful to the Minister for giving way a second time. Can I just remind him that the tax burden has gone up by 27 billion in the last year, and it will go up by 19 billion after the election because of decisions his party made. And the earnings of those under 19,000 they're going to be worse off under this budget. 2 decades of lost pay growth. That is the record of his government over the last 14 years.
Yeah. Well, the reality is, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I thought I'd already covered off this point, that of course the tax burden has had to go up to pay for all the support that we provided around COVID and the inflationary pressures from a war on European soil. But what the Honourable Lady can't get away from is that this fiscal event and the previous one mean that 27 million people employed in businesses up and down this country working hard will be better off to the extent of £900 per year. The self-employed, £650 per year. 2 million of those. And she says, well, those under 19,000. Well, those above 19,000 are many millions of people who actually, when you take the interplay of the freezing of thresholds and the cut in national insurance, will actually have a lower tax burden than they would have done before. I'll give way to the honourable gentleman.
I thank the Minister for giving way. It's been widely reported that the taxpayer is having to pick up the tab for £15,000 of legal costs and damages. incurred due to the actions of the Honourable Member for Chippenham, who is rapidly becoming known as the Honourable Member for Chipping In. Can the Minister confirm that the 15,000 number is correct? And can he say whether he thinks it's morally right that the taxpayer should be picking up the bill for the outrageous lack of judgment and behaviour of one of his colleagues?
What I think will be absolutely outrageous will be the taxpayer having to pick up the bill of a future Labour government, to be absolutely frank. As I have just explained, the record of the honourable gentleman's party in government. I believe that my honourable friend is trying to catch me up.
I'm very grateful to my right honourable friend Vivian Way. He's making a very good case for yesterday's announcements in the budget. He's dealt very thoroughly with Labour's record when in office. But would he now turn his attention to what their proposals today? Because if they're not going to reverse the tax on non-doms, they're not going to reverse the tax on national insurance. Doesn't that leave their present proposals as a whopping £6.5 billion uncosted expenditure pledges?
My honourable friend is absolutely right. And of course, Madam Deputy Speaker, right at the beginning of my speech, I did invite the right honourable lady to explain to the House what she is going to do, given that the non-dom status will be abolished, given that the windfall taxes will come forward on oil and gas. What is she going to do? Is she going to once again, as she did with the 28 billion, U-turn and run for the hills? Or is she going to raise taxes or raise borrowing? And answer came, there none. I give way to the honourable lady.
When the Minister has time, he might want to read my honourable friend, the Shadow Chancellor's speech back on Hansard and give his colleague later a bit of help. If I can take him back to ordinary people who, as a result of last year's mini-budget, are now paying, when they're remortgaging, an extra £240 a month more than they were previously. This is real money for people remortgaging. If he doesn't accept there's a £46 billion hole now as a result of yesterday, perhaps he can tell us what he thinks it is. But can he assure those people remortgaging this year that they won't be further impacted by his announcements yesterday when they seek to remortgage, and that there won't be a further scare on those markets?
What I can reassure all mortgage holders up and down the country is that this government is absolutely determined to see inflation return to its target, and indeed the OBR in its latest economic fiscal outlook that it published yesterday makes it clear that we will meet the 2% target 1 year earlier than they forecast in the autumn. And the significance of that, of course, for interest rates is very obvious. Interest rates will come down faster if inflation recedes quicker. And indeed, that is exactly what is happening. But I think I've been very generous with... How could I say no? But then I must make some progress.
A decent man, Minister, you're a decent man. The government make much of getting value for money, but they've little to say about the handing over of Teesside's greatest land asset to two private developers who've banked tens of millions of pounds in profit since, leaving crumbs for the public. And that's after the investment of £500 million of taxpayers' money and no private investment. Is he content with that? Or, as his own government inquiry into the Tees Mayor's business dealings recommended, does he believe that deal should be renegotiated?
Well, I'm not going to get into the weeds of the issue that the honourable gentleman is attempting to draw me into, but other than to say that there was at least one comment that he made that I did agree with, which is that I am indeed a decent man, and I thank him very much indeed for that. But can I say, Madam Deputy Speaker, that inflation is falling faster than expected. People's wages, real wages, are rising now and have done for the last 7 months. Under this government, our labour market has been strong and resilient, delivering opportunities despite the headwinds. And under this government, we put incentives at the heart of our welfare. And under this government, we've grown, as I said, faster than Germany, France or Italy, and will continue to do so, according to the OBR, over the next 5 years. We're attracting the business investment that's key to growth, delivering high-quality jobs right across the country, from Nissan to Google to AstraZeneca, who announced £650 million worth of investment only yesterday. And no matter how much the party opposite seeks to talk down Britain, the investment flowing into our economy is a huge vote of confidence in our country. It shows that our plan is working. By contrast, Madam Deputy Speaker, as has been laid all too bare this afternoon, the Labour Party opposite have no plan. plan. They have no credible record. I've already gone through the tale of woe of the level of unemployment that Labour have left us in the past. Those poor young people, 45% increase in youth unemployment on her party's watch. And, as I said earlier, over 1 million people left on out-of-work benefits for almost a decade. We on this side of this House believe that it is work, not welfare, that is key to improving living standards, and that's why we're incentivising and rewarding work in this budget. Making work pay and ensuring families are better off also means tackling the global inflation that I've also referred to, where we are making very significant progress. We recognise, Madam Deputy Speaker, that there are still some, as inflation decreases, who need extra help, and that's why I was particularly pleased to see, and I know the Honourable Gentleman, the Chair of the Work and Pensions Select Committee, also pushed this, the extension of the Household Support Fund from April for a further 6 months. But, Madam Deputy, I will give way to the Honourable Gentleman.
Very briefly, I'm grateful to him, and he's absolutely right. I do warmly welcome that extension. But isn't there, in reality, a very strong case for making that not another 6 months, but to make the Household Support Fund permanent?
Well, I do think that the fact that it's 6 months is a meaningful, very meaningful period of time. And we do know, of course, that inflation is coming down. The OBR says in its report that inflation is expected to hit target within the next few months, and I think that will make a huge difference. There are some uncertainties that it highlights around that, but I think that 6 months, £500 million worth of investment, including Barnett consequentials, is a major move forward in terms of supporting some of those who are indeed the most vulnerable. But, Madam Deputy Speaker, the sustainable way to change lives is through work, and the evidence couldn't be clearer. It's good for the economy, for communities and for the individuals concerned. For everyone who can work, I want them to have the opportunity to do so. But today, Madam Deputy Speaker, one of the great labour market challenges is economic inactivity, and I want to put that into context. In the UK, this has come down since its pandemic peak and remains lower than the average across the G7, the OECD and the European Union. And our progress has seen a significant fall in the number of people who are inactive because of caring responsibilities. We have the second lowest youth inactivity rate in the G7, and thousands of over 50s are now returning to work. However, the rise in the number of people who are out of work due to ill health and disability is stifling potential that I am determined to realise. And that is why, as we cut taxes for working people, our multi-billion-pound back-to-work plan is providing substantial support to help the long-term sick return to work and keep people in the workforce. And this includes doubling the number of placements on universal support, expanding access to mental health support, delivering WorkWell, giving people earlier and better access to integrated work and health support, and reforming fit notes and working with employers to improve occupational health. And through our next generation of welfare reforms, we are breaking down the barriers to work. Our Chance to Work guarantee will enable people on incapacity benefits to try work without fear of losing their benefits if a job does not work out. And as the OBR has confirmed, our reforms to the work capability assessment will reduce the number of people on these benefits by 371,000. That's 371,000 more people, Madam Deputy Speaker, getting the support they need to enter employment. And as part of our Back to Work plan, we're also tackling long-term unemployment, because the longer people stay in unemployment, the less likely they are to rejoin the workforce. That's why we're phasing in more rigorous requirements for fit and able job seekers, more time with work coaches, more intensive support, mandatory work placements, and ultimately, if a claimant doesn't engage with the support they're being offered, they will lose their benefits, underscoring our belief that we should always be there for those who need our support, but we must equally be fair to taxpayers. By contrast, Madam Deputy Speaker, for all the protestations from the party opposite that they have changed, they're not fooling anybody. They're squeamish on conditionality, and they are weak on sanctions, and completely out of touch with the British public, who rightly expect a welfare system in which everyone meets their obligations. Madam, I will conclude. I'm being asked to conclude, so I think I need to. Madam, I have been pretty generous in giving away to just about everybody that was sought to catch by. Madam Deputy Speaker, this is a budget that rewards work and will grow the economy. It comes on the back of a once-in-a-century challenge, a challenge that this government has met. Madam Deputy Speaker, we have turned the corner, and this budget takes us further still. It rewards work with lower taxes. It delivers growth. It makes work pay and ensures a brighter future for us all.
SNP spokesperson Peter Grant.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I thought it was interesting when the topics for these debates were set, and the topics, of course, of what the government want us to believe the budget was all about. There was no mention of public services. There was no mention of the cost of living. There was no mention of climate change or net zero in any of the 3 days. We're talking here about rewarding work, and I want to talk about rewarding work, not only those who are currently in work, but those who will be our workforce and those who have previously been our workforce, because all 3 of those groups have been shamefully failed in this budget. For me, rewarding work means pay everybody a living wage, not a minimum wage, a living wage, if the Minister's listening, which clearly doesn't care about. A wage that is not enough to live on is not a living wage. Simple. There's nothing about banning exploitative zero-hours contracts. There's nothing, obviously, about repealing the shameful anti-strike legislation that the government are imposing on a great number of public sector workers. I wondered if maybe it was just that the topics weren't that good, and maybe in the Chancellor's speech it said more about these subjects. So I had a look at certainly the speech as is on the Treasury website, all 7,260 odd words of it. The word poverty gets mentioned once. Low pay, not at all. 0 hours, none. Net zero gets a mention because the Chancellor mentioned his colleague, who is the Secretary of State for net zero, among other things. Zero emissions get mentioned once. Climate, not a single mention. Brexit, not surprisingly, we're not allowed to talk about that anymore. Brexit, not a mention. So, by necessity, some of my remarks today have got to be about what's not in the budget as much as what is. This government is heading to become the worst government in history for falling living standards. The Institute for Fiscal Studies have told us that it's very unlikely that during the lifetime of this Parliament, real household incomes will be any higher at the end than they were at the beginning. How can you call that economic growth if people in real lives, in real houses, in real jobs don't notice any improvement in their standard of living over an entire 5 years? Tax as a percentage of GDP will soon be the highest it has ever been. We've seen a £66 billion increase in the tax burden this Parliament alone, and far too often it's people on lower incomes who pick up the biggest share of that. For example, as has been mentioned, the 6-year freeze on tax thresholds cost taxpayers an extra £30 billion in stealth tax by 27-28, even allowing for the impact of the 2p national insurance charge cut. The UK's interest payments as a percentage of national income are about to become the highest for 70 years. So rewarding work, yeah. If you're an international banker, the rewards can be very rich indeed, but not if you're trying to scrape a living in any kind of normal job. This Chancellor's time in office has seen the longest unbroken run of declining living standards since records began. Rewarding work, quite the opposite. Income inequalities in the United Kingdom are higher than they are in any other large European economy. What have the United Kingdom done that they didn't? Or what has everyone else done that the United Kingdom didn't do? Germany, for example, had a COVID pandemic just like we did. Germany, for example, is affected by the war in Ukraine, possibly more so because they're physically close to it. They're impacted by the war in Ukraine just as much as we are. Middle-income earners in the United Kingdom are now 20% poorer than their equivalents in Germany. I wonder what it could be that's affected the economy and living standards in the United Kingdom that is not at the same impact on Germany, France, Italy and other EU member states. We're not allowed to say the B word, so I'll leave the Chancellor to work it out for himself. As the Child Poverty Action Group have pointed out, child poverty is not inevitable, it's a choice. They have said that with the right policy changes, we can substantially reduce the extent and depth of child poverty across the country. And you don't have to take their word for what might happen if policies were changed. You only have to look at what's happened in Scotland. Despite the fact that the Scottish Government has got substantially fewer fiscal powers, monetary powers and legislative powers than this place has got. Scotland now has the game-changing Scottish Child Payment, not our words, game-changing by the way, the Child Poverty Action Group. The Child Winter Heating Payment, supporting the most vulnerable young people with disabilities to cope with their fuel bills. Free school meals to everybody in primary 1 to 5 and to eligible children throughout the school term.
The member mentions the Child Poverty Action Group. After the Scottish Government's budget, they said they were bitterly disappointed with the Scottish Government budget. As it stands, the budget will at best stall progress, hampering progress in others towards reducing child poverty. Does he think his own government is reducing child poverty as much as they could?
I'll come on to that in a minute, because yes, well, maybe not as much as they could, because nobody's ever perfect, but a blooming sight greater than any government down here is ever going to do. As I said, free school meals to everybody in the first 5 years of primary school and to a great many children right up until they leave school. We've followed the example of our Scandinavian friends by welcoming every newborn baby in Scotland with a baby box containing the essentials of the first 6 months of their life. Not just practical physical help, but the difference it makes to a new mum. Simply something that says to her, we think that your baby is somebody special, your baby is welcome as a new citizen of our country. 1,140 hours per year of early learning and childcare, I'll give you in a second, of early learning and childcare for every 3-year-old, every 4-year-old and all eligible 2-year-olds.
Just to correct an earlier point when he said that the Scottish Government would do more than any government down here, just to remind him, helpfully really, that under the last Labour Government, obviously we lifted hundreds of thousands, up to 1 million children out of poverty, and we would seek to do that sort of work again. So it does make a difference to the government here in Westminster. Would he not agree?
Yeah. I'm not saying that a government here can't do it. In fact, I'm making the point that a government here can do it. The problem is that the government that her party told us we could trust with our welfare system is not doing it. We've also introduced free bus travel throughout Scotland for 2 million people, including all young people up to the age of 21. Very important, because not only does it significantly help them with the cost of their travel and therefore the cost of living, but it encourages young people not get into the habit of travelling by car. It encourages young people to get into the habit of seeing public transport as a viable option. In answer to the honourable member from Rutherglen and Hamilton West, this year independent analysis has indicated that 100,000 children in Scotland will be kept out of child poverty this year because of the actions of the Scottish Government. That means that if a UK Government was willing simply to do what's already been done in Scotland, we could be looking at 1 million fewer children living in poverty in the United Kingdom. Child poverty is not inevitable, it's a deliberate political choice. Scotland has chosen to say no to child poverty. This budget has chosen to allow it to continue and to grow. And as well as direct support for children in low-earning families, there's any number of things that the government could have announced that would have helped people who are in work to have better and secure pay. Obviously, the living wage I've already mentioned. They could strengthen protection for workers instead of taking away the rights to strike if they're working in all sorts of public sector work.
Very grateful. In terms of strengthening protection, isn't it true that the SNP hired people on zero-hour contracts to deliver literature during the Rutherglen by-election?
Yeah, I mean, what?
I read that in Private Eye. That's all. It's in Private Eye, therefore it must be true. I don't know if that has actually been fact-checked, but if the gentleman can provide me with evidence from something other than Private Eye, then we'll certainly look into it. I should say, incidentally, that the Labour Party's record of industrial relations within its own workforce is not exactly anything to boast about, so the honourable gentleman might want to have a look within his own house, first of all. So among the other steps that the government could take, and I look forward to the incoming or likely incoming Labour government committing to doing all of this as well. They could outlaw despicable fire and hire practices. They could support the bill that's been put forward by my honourable friend for Paisley and Renfrewshire North. They could ban unpaid work trials, as was attempted by my honourable friend from Glasgow South in his private member's bill. They could give the right to flexible working rather than making it feel as if it's something that is not really quite proper working. They could finally take action 7 years after the Taylor Review. They could repeal the anti-strike legislation. Incidentally, the Scottish Government has given an undertaking that they will not use any of the anti-strike provisions that are included in that legislation. I look forward to an incoming Labour Government undertaking not to use them as a precursor to repealing it altogether. Some changes in the budget I think we can mention, although they don't go far enough. Changes to the high-income child benefit charge are certainly welcome, but they don't go far enough to catch up with the downturn in income that people have suffered over the years that has been frozen. The same with the VAT threshold charge for small businesses. It's welcome that it's increased by £10,000 a year. That's not enough to make up even for the deterioration in small business income after 7 years of that ongoing stealth tax. And of course, we still have a position where child maintenance liability for a non-resident parent is based on assumptions about wage levels and cost of living levels that are years and years and years out of date. The government say they don't have time in the legislative programme to bring forward primary legislation to change it. Last week the House finished 3 hours early because we had nothing to talk about. Come on, if they were serious about it, they would have done something about it. On other matters, I mentioned net zero and climate change earlier on, Madam Deputy Speaker. I welcome the confirmation of, although it's up to, which is a worry, up to 120 million more to the Green Industries Growth Accelerator, to quote the Chancellor's speech, to build supply chains for new technology ranging from offshore wind to carbon capture and storage. But can we get an assurance that we won't make the same mistakes with this as the government made with contracts for difference? The former Bifab yard in my constituency in Methil went into administration because the jackets that they could have made under contracts for difference, firms chose to import them from halfway around the world. So while workers were being laid off that could have done the work in my constituency, we were paying to transport heavy engineered goods from the other side of the world. So can I ask the government to commit to reviewing the criteria for GIGA so that they include the manufacture of jackets for offshore wind turbines? That makes up about 40% of the total cost of a turbine, 40% of the supply chain. At the moment, it's being excluded from that incentive scheme, and it is something that, if included, could help to bolster certainly the workforce in my constituency and in a number of other constituencies around the UK. I invite the government to welcome again the contribution that green hydrogen can make to our net zero future. I'm very, very pleased indeed that again Methil in my constituency is home to H100, the world's biggest ever conversion of domestic gas supply to run on clean, renewable green hydrogen. The biggest example of that kind of green energy innovation anywhere on the planet. The next stage is even more ambitious. The government promised to course, had over £1 billion illegally underpaid to pensioners, utterly scandalous. Woefully inadequate protection from pension scams for both people building up the private pensions and, as some members here will be all too well aware, things like LCF, British Steel, UK AEA pension funds and dozens of others. So we have a budget here that chooses to leave hundreds of thousands of children in poverty. It chooses to allow the scandal of low pay and exploitative work practices to continue. It chooses to continue inflicting stealth taxes that hit low-paid workers hardest. And in answer to the Shadow Chancellor earlier on, I don't have a problem with debating a progressive tax regime that has lower taxation, yes, lower taxation for the low-paid and higher taxation for those who are better off. When we're talking about high rates of tax and low rates of tax, I think we should remember the entire tax burden, not just be very selective of the income tax, for example, council tax. I'm the proud possessor of 2 council tax bills, one for my house in Glenrothes and one for the flat that's paid by the taxpayer while I'm down here. A flat in London and a very nice, very fortunately for me, a very nice detached house in Glenrothes. The flat in London already costs more in council tax than the house in Glenrothes. And this year, because the Labour-controlled council, whose area I live in, by the way, is likely to increase the council tax by 7%, while the council in Fife has accepted the Scottish Government's funding to allow them to freeze the council tax. Council tax on a flat in London is going to be 15% higher than in a very nice, spacious, detached house in Glenrothes. So when they're talking about the tax burden on people between the two countries, let's remember the entire tax burden, not just the very narrowly defined income tax burden. And of course, as I mentioned before, one of the reasons why some people in Scotland pay higher tax is because they're paid more than their colleagues doing the same job south of the border. So, Madam Deputy Speaker, the budget chooses not to support the children of working people. It chooses not to support working people. It then chooses that when their working life is over, they treat them far worse than people of a similar age and similar background would be entitled to be treated in almost any other civilised economy. By contrast, the SNP have a vision for a country where every child and every parent is valued and supported and know that they're valued and supported, where every worker is guaranteed a fair wage, every worker is protected from exploitation, where every pensioner is entitled to a pension that's enough to live on without having to fall back on state benefits, and that they get the care they need as they grow older and less able to look after themselves. Valuing and fairly rewarding not only today's workers, but the next generation of workers and previous generations of workers, all of whom are being let down by this budget. I hold out no great enthusiasm that an incoming Labour government will significantly change that. I would like to be proved wrong, but I can't really see it happening. In part of her speech, in fact it may have been an intervention, the Shadow Chancellor said, if the Tories had any confidence in their record, they should name the date for the general election. Absolutely. Can I suggest that if an incoming Labour government had any confidence in the record of the Union, they would have no hesitation in naming the date to put that to the democratic test as well. So we'll wait and see whether the incoming Labour government is any greater respecter of the will of the people of Scotland than the outgoing Conservative budget. Madam Deputy Speaker, the Chancellor claimed or said in his closing remarks that he thought that those that have the broadest shoulders should be asked to pay their fair share. I absolutely agree. The Chancellor always said an economy based on sound money does not pass on its bills to the next generation. Oh, really? I agree with both those statements, Madam Speaker, and for that reason, among others, I cannot support this budget, and it does not deserve the support of anyone in this chamber.
Sir Christopher Chope. Madam Deputy Speaker, it's a great privilege to follow the honourable gentleman speaking for the Scottish National Party. What I didn't really hear from him is the justification which he and his party use for increasing taxes, which is a total anathema to almost everybody who's speaking in this debate, who's complaining about the high level of taxes which we've already got. But can I say, Madam Deputy Speaker, that I welcome the government's rethink on national insurance. As somebody who has regularly voted against increases in national insurance from previous Chancellors of the Exchequer, I'm delighted to see the change of heart. I also welcome the rethink on the unfairness of the higher income child benefit charge. When that was being legislated on, I put a lot of time and energy into asking questions and speaking against it and voting against it, and couldn't persuade anybody in the Conservative government then that it was extremely unfair that a household with £95,000 of income coming from one person was being only subject to this charge, and where you had two earners, they were able to avoid it by each of them earning £45,000. And that's now going to be put right, and in my view it's long overdue, but nonetheless welcome. But I'd be interested in asking the Minister a specific question arising from what was said on this, and that is, will the move to using household level information from 2026 with HMRC enable the government to introduce transferable tax allowances and end the discrimination in the tax system against married couples, because that would be an even bigger benefit from introducing household level information and taxing on that basis. And I hope that that will be one of the great spin-offs from this initiative. But I'd be grateful if the Minister would be able to respond to that point when he winds up. I welcome, Madam Deputy Speaker, the increase in the VAT threshold from 85,000 to 90,000, although I think it's a pretty meagre 6% increase after 7 years of being frozen, and I would like to see it go even higher. And I also welcome the Great British ISA, but why is it limited to £5,000? Last night we had an amazing gathering in the Guildhall in London. I don't know whether any of my honourable friends on the front bench were there, but it was a celebration of the Centre for Policy Studies' 50th anniversary. And it was a great occasion, and it celebrated the work that Keith Joseph, Margaret Thatcher and Alfred Sherman put into place 50 years ago in setting up what I think has been the most successful Conservative think tank of all time. But there was, Madam Deputy Speaker, I have to say, universal disappointment in the audience there that the overall tax burden has not peaked, and that the budget statement confirmed that it is going to rise even further in each of the next 4 years and beyond. And that's despite the fact that we've already got the highest tax burden ever. And there doesn't seem to be any explanation as to why the Conservative government was still pursuing that policy of increasing the tax burden. The Prime Minister spoke as ever eloquently and echoed the philosophy and founding principles of the Centre for Policy Studies. He spoke of the small state, the need for low taxes, and promoting enterprise and supply-side reforms. And indeed, the Prime Minister's rhetoric chimed in with the Chancellor's own budget statements. I'm going to quote 3 of them. Conservatives know that lower tax means higher growth. Matters to Conservatives. 3, lower taxed economies have more energy, more dynamism and more innovation. I couldn't agree more. And yet we have a budget which is actually increasing the overall burden of taxation and seems to be running counter to that rhetoric. And my constituents, I think, are concerned about actions rather than words. And I hope that in responding to this debate, my honourable friend will be able to explain why, despite that rhetoric, the actual budget content doesn't fit in with it. And where does this leave us? Because as we approach a general election, and from my point of view, I think the better,